let's sit together, probably with the business, with the IT, the right people in a room. And if you talk about a process, like in a day, you can at least get to a clickable prototype. It might not like integrate all the systems. Yes, fair. But it might do a little bit of that. It might show you a mock-up UI or whatever. And then you have probably even some forms you can click through. And you have what you just said. You see the token move through, you see the process flowing. And this helps so much to understand what process automation means and how you should think about that. So that's definitely worth doing it.
Welcome to the New Process Podcast. Learn all the tools, methods, and best practices combined with people, emotions, and a human-centric mindset to rethink your process and push it to the next level. And here is your host, Mirko Kloppenberg.
Yeah, welcome to episode 12 of New Process Podcast, which is going to be an extraordinary conversation on BPM tools and process automation with Camunda's Chief Technologist, Bernd Ruecker. Bernd is not only Chief Technologist at Camunda, he also co-founded the company together with Jakob Freund in 2008. Since then, Camunda has become the first address when it comes to process automation. And what many people may not know, Bernd once also worked for Lufthansa, just like me. And that's where we met back in 2001. So as Camunda is not a typical BPM tool for modeling of processes and presenting these to the employees, which I'm looking for in my search for a human-centric BPM tool, this is really going to be an extraordinary conversation about BPM tools in general. So it's going to be a real game changer, and it's going to kick off my interview series with BPM tool vendors to find a human-centric BPM tool. So there are a lot of interviews coming up. Not all the time, just BPM tools. I'm going to switch between interviews with BPM tool vendors on the one hand side and other method experts in between. So don't worry, I'm not going to publish tool episodes all the time. So there might be other interesting episodes as well coming up. But today, so what you're going to learn today, Bernd will explain how to segment the different types of BPM tools on the market. So just as an overview, and then we'll deep dive into process automation, and Bernd will provide a lot of insights into different use cases. And he'll also give his recommendations on how to start with process automation. So this is especially also for process architects, which are already on a mature state where the processes are documented and you manage these processes. Now you want to start automating, then this is also an interview which is worth listening. So enjoy the interview with Bernd Ruecker.
And now, let's start to rethink processes.
Yeah, welcome, Bernd. Welcome to the New Process Podcast. It's a real pleasure and an honor to have you here as my guest to talk about human-centric BPM tools. Welcome.
Thank you, Mirko. It's my pleasure to be here. If it's the first episode, it's always a kind of a very exciting moment, I think, especially for you.
Yeah, definitely. And as I already said in the introduction, it's going to be an extraordinary tool interview here today. So we'll learn later on what this is really about. But before we get into all the details, let's start with a check-in. And I still remember us both standing in Frankfurt at the airport checking in. So what is your preferred seat, aisle or window in an aircraft?
Well, the one thing when I think about that is I actually hate flying, so I prefer trains if possible. Not always possible, I know. And then it's definitely window. For me, it's always window. Even in the train, it's always window because then you can like nap a little bit if you like it. You have something where you can lean your head on. So window always. Even if you have climbed above other people to go to the toilet, that's a fair price to pay.
That's great. Okay. So, even if you hate flying, what is your favorite airport then?
So for me, two things. The one thing is I have good memories of Copenhagen for some weird reason, because I had a lot of, I was there, I think 2 times, and both times it was kind of a creative atmosphere there while waiting for the check-in. And
that's cool.
I did some writing there. I remember that, and that was okay. It might have been luck, might have been the atmosphere. I have no idea. And despite that, of course, Frankfurt is kind of my home airport. I started my professional working life in a way there. I'm there relatively frequent. I know all the bits and pieces there. So even if it's big and ugly and slow and whatever, that's kind of my home airport.
Yeah, I fully agree. I remember I was yesterday there in Frankfurt and it felt like being at home somehow.
A straight home, but yeah, I know what you mean.
That's cool. Okay, then let's get a little bit closer to the topic of processes. So what was the best process you have ever experienced?
Yeah, when I hear about that question, I think it's pretty hard because you experience processes like every day, hundreds of times. And I think if they are really good, you very often don't recognize it, because I think that's one of the key features. If you have a good process, the customer experience is so slick. That's just like, wow, that's great. And very often you get used to that. And you don't even recognize. So thinking about that, I think one of the exceptional cases where I was really surprised was, it was a very, very normal thing, which I, at least pre-pandemic, did like on a daily basis, like checking into hotels. And the hotel check-in is really a really bad design process. It's like they have all your data, but you arrive there, they ask you the data again. You tell them, they write it down. Is that correct? No, the name is spelled differently and whatever. You have to queue for that. And my kind of guess is the more expensive the hotel, the longer you have to wait for that. And then I had a hotel in the Netherlands actually, and they did send me an email saying, hey, here you can check in online. You can enter all the data yourself, and then you get an access code. And I even didn't have to stop for checking it. And what I liked about that, first of all, it was much smoother for me, much more comfortable. And they did not simply automate some parts of it, like giving you a tablet here, you can enter data. I had that in the past. They really rethought the whole process and digitized it, and it improved the customer experience big time. And I think that's one of the key things when thinking about process automation, which is important. And I really enjoyed that part from the customer experience.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Great. So thanks for checking in. Then let's board the aircraft and let's start. How would you describe your relationship to processes?
I mean, that's an interesting question, because I always say in my talks, if I introduce myself, I say something like I do process automation for all my life, which is kind of a simplification probably. So let's say the professional life and only after like probably high school or whatever. But it's kind of what was driving me since the beginning of working in a way. So even during my high school, I got in contact with process automation already from a friend. He started his own business and was pretty successful with that. So he drowned in a lot of like piles of orders, of inquiries, of payments, of returns goods, all these kind of things, and needed something to handle that growth basically. And we developed some kind of software back then, which basically was automating certain processes. And already there, I got really deep into that topic. And from there on, I couldn't let go of it. I was fascinated in a way. So from both angles, like how can I understand the process? Like also probably visually, how can I discuss it? How can I think about it? But at the same time about how can I really automate that then? How can I not only draw a picture and say, okay, that's great. Now what? But how can I use that to really give that to a computer to execute in a way? And that, since then I was kind of caught in that topic. So it's a pretty deep relationship to processes for me.
That's cool. Yeah. Great. And I remember the message you sent to me after I published my request for information that I was looking for a human-centric tool. And you said something like, Mirko, I think Camunda is not exactly what you're looking for with regards to human-centric BPM tool, but for sure we take humans into account. So before we go closer onto what Camunda is really doing, how would you describe or segment the overall BPM tool market?
Yeah, that's complicated, honestly. Yeah. So I tried to get my head around that for, I think, the last 5 years or something like that. Before that, our positioning was very close to software development. We had our niche. It worked relatively okay. BPM was like 10 years ago, it was a thing. If you said BPM, people knew what you meant. Business process management, okay, and you want to have that workflow engine, whatever thingy. That much was clearer, but my observation was that this term kind of faded away, at least the fame of it. But the topic did not. So of course you still had the processes. You wanted to automate them. You wanted to understand them. And that led to a situation where you have a market with a lot of different tools and tools categories. If you look at the analysts, for example, they even do not really the same categories. Like if you look at Gartner or Forrester, they do different things. And if you look at the overall market, I would say it's really complicated. So as a kind of a best guess, I would differentiate certain like buckets of tools. So first of all, there are these BPMS, business process management systems. That's kind of very often software from the past in a way. So that's not the most modern stuff. It's very often very integrated tools, very monolithic tools. Pega comes to mind first, where kind of their view of the world was, okay, you do everything in that tool and then it's kind of great. So it's kind of a proprietary software development with a BPM focus. These are these kind of BPMS. Then you have a lot of integration tools. So they're rooted in integration, sometimes from the ESB world of things. So connecting different systems. Very often with a process focus now. So you can have a flow which does like, okay, I send the data there, then I send it there. So you have simple processes for integration. Gartner, I think it's Gartner calls that iPaaS, Intelligent Process Automation as a Service. That's at least a category. Then I think one of the most spoken of categories at the moment is RPA, Robotic Process Automation. That still has a hype, even if it's a little bit on the decline. The idea here, it's basically that if you have a software that doesn't have a proper API, you put a bot on top, which is basically about screen scraping, so it can read the screen, the UI of the application, and it can enter data there, so it can control the user interface in a way. That way you can automate certain tasks that humans did before by simply clicking around. And if this is a repetitive thing, it's probably boring. So the bot can do that cheaper, better, faster, whatever. And that's RPA. We might dive into that later a little bit, but I find the name pretty misleading. So it's not that much about processes. It's in a way, it's a robotic task automation. They normally automate one task, enter that data in that system. Mm-hmm. That has multiple steps because you go to that field, you click that button and whatever. So it's a micro process in a way, but it's a very different thing in a way. So that's RPA, pretty famous recently. The other category that got quite some attention is process mining. So recently, for example, especially in Germany, Celonis is one of the big players. They got big funding recently. So that's a lot of people are talking about process mining now. Process mining, the idea is not to control anything, but it's basically to read different log files, different data they find from existing systems in order to make sense of that and reconstruct how the process did work, how people did work on the process. So you then can probably visualize that by recognizing, you entered that in SAP, then you went to that application, then here something appeared in Salesforce. So it seems like this is the process you're executing. So that's basically the whole field of process mining. And then you have a whole slew of low code tools. That's also quite a hype at the moment. And now it gets more complicated because they're somehow overlapping with the others because there are low code tools that focus on integration. So there are low-code tools that focus on human tasks. Probably there are low-code tools that focus much more on overall processes. So RPA is kind of low-code sometimes. So it starts to get a bit more blurry here. But the basic idea, and that's interesting to explore probably later on as well, is to shift the kind of the ability to define process solutions from developers only to other roles. And this is a big continuum, which is really interesting to explore. But in the past, it was very often kind of a binary thing. So low code is for the business people and software development is for the hardcore software developers. And I think it's much more nuanced in the middle now. But there's a lot of like platforms still market in that direction. And I mean, then there are these kind of like normal software systems or SaaS offerings where you have whatever a ticketing system can implement kind of a process. If you have IT tickets, they follow an internal process. Probably you have ERP systems that probably allow to customize certain processes that happen inside. You have dedicated software that might simply automate certain processes. So we, for example, have a lot of SaaS tools we're using for absent management or for handing in travel expenses or these kind of things. So they're fully automated, not in a customized way, but they're still automatic processes. So lots of different things. And from our perspective, what we kind of seeing at the moment is, so we see ourselves as an orchestration tool. And in the past, especially when talking to analysts, for example, they had kind of problems to put us in the right category because like a BPMS is kind of, no, that's not really what we think we are. We are much more developer friendly, much more open, whatever. We're not an iPaaS because we don't have that low code-ish integration functionalities. We're not an RPA player, obviously, and so on and so forth. So, we see ourselves as a process orchestrator, and process orchestration for me is a lot about like really controlling the overall flow of things and then jumping to other, like probably an RPA tool. So we could orchestrate other RPA pods, or we could orchestrate humans. That's why the hook to that show, or we could orchestrate some kind of integration or existing systems or whatever. That was a long answer, I know.
Yeah, but
that's kind of
good.
the complexity of the market at the moment, I think. And I probably forgot a couple of things.
Yeah, where would you put these typical, I would say, process documentation tools which you are using to communicate the process towards the employees to have a common basis?
Right. That's
what I have in mind there.
I forgot to mention on that landscape because that's not what's top of my mind. So what's top of my mind is always around something that executes something, that runs something. Documentation only doesn't run that much. That's why I don't have it like front of mind. Yeah, of course, that's also a category. So we have this whole process documentation tools, which very often comes with a portal access, or probably also with collaboration features. So you can just discuss around the process and ask things around that. Yes, yeah, they're definitely also kind of a category. There are quite some tools. I think it's opinion, but it's my opinion. I think I can express that here, but I think it gets only really valuable if you connect that to execution at some point in time. Because just drawing processes, I always found that a bit boring, because that's kind of, what's the value of that? I understand that you want to have an overview, and sometimes you need, for compliance reasons or for regulation reasons, you need a kind of a documented process. Yeah, and understand that part. But in a lot of scenarios, then I wouldn't stop there. If that's a repetitive process, that's probably the requirement. And I know, like, for example, you worked at Lufthansa Technik, and there are some of the processes which are basically driven by humans. If you're a technician and you do stuff at the aircraft, of course, you're driving the process. That might be a different thing. But for example, I work a lot with insurances, with banks, with telecommunication companies. So it's pure information in a way. It's pure software. So there you have the ability to automate things, and then stopping with the documentation would be a weird thing to do. It definitely helps you to get started, probably. At the same time, if you automate with the right tools, you get the picture, the overview of the process, kind of as a side effect, a super nice side effect, by the way. And it's always accurate. It's up to date. It's living documentation. And one of my key favorite situations or stories was really, it's quite a while ago. It's, I think, 10 years, maybe 12, or probably even 15 years. I get gray hairs by now. So, I was at an insurance company, and we're like, from the IT side, we're looking at automating small things there. So I was sitting in that office, and there was a big shelf with a lot of paper in there. And somebody said, or I basically asked, what's that? And I said, okay, that's our process documentation because we're ISO whatever certified. And why is that standing here? Are you looking into that? And he said basically, no, there was no space anywhere else. So they put it here, but nobody ever comes to look to that. We just need to have it. And that's kind of that's so dead effort. Wow, it's a weird thing. I always thought that's probably a German invention. I'm not sure. But that's my opinion. I know it might be extreme, but I'm a software development person.
Yeah,
I'm kind of automation enthusiast.
Yeah, that's super interesting because for me, it's always the basis to create a process or understanding before you can start to automate processes. So unfortunately, that's where a lot of people stop right now, organizations. Yeah, they somehow found out it definitely makes sense to talk about processes and to create a common picture of how the process look like. And maybe they already started to manage these processes. And then first of the activities for me would be also to have a look onto how to automate these processes.
Yeah.
So that's a core activity of process architects, the ones who are responsible for the further development of processes. And I would definitely look into these fields as well. Yeah,
100%. I think one of the key success factors in a way is how you organize that. So also in Germany, I saw that a lot in the past. It changes, but in the past, sometimes you had that kind of organization or part of the organization, which is only looking into organization, and parts of the organization, which is IT and in business was detached. So there were very different kind of satellites, sometimes not talking enough with each other. So it was more like, let's do that process landscape. Let's document that process, without involving the IT. Very often you had to involve the business because they know how the process works. You go there, ask them stuff, you do workshops and whatever, and you end up with a process, but you did not involve the IT because kind of the automation was not goal from the beginning. It was more like, okay, now we understand the process. Now let's look into automation. And then very often what happens is either IT is not super happy with what they get, or it's kind of a weird situation. That's one problem you might get. The other problem is even if they're on board with it, the process input they get is normally not, it's a starting point, but it's not what it can automate like directly. You cannot simply put that into production, but you have to probably question a lot of things. You have to probably correct a lot of assumptions that in the process model about the IT systems, about what it can do and what not. And then if you want to do that, you involve business again. And they're normally like, we talked about this process already like a month ago, nothing happened. So we're not really into that. And this can all lead to a lot of like friction you could avoid and that's my favorite thing actually to do. And I saw that working with a lot of customers is that you sit together with all of them in the beginning, and then you're not documenting like all the processes. No, you're really looking into where is the pain, which we can solve, which we need to solve right now. So there's some ROI behind that. There's a project, there's budget. And then you look into that and say, okay, now we get everybody together in the same room. Okay, we have still a COVID situation, so a Zoom room is fine, but everybody together and discuss that together, saying like, okay, what's the business problem here? What's the process? You need that methodology and the tooling there probably, but also like the IT, because they very often have good ideas around what is possible and what not. Where could we probably digitize and where not, and so on and so forth. And if you have all that together and the goal is from the beginning, okay, we automate that process, I think you get to much better results. And I know I'm talking too much, but
no.
To add one thought there. And if I say automating process here, what I mean is again the orchestration part of it, at least the automation of that overall flow model, which you might draw during that workshop, where you say, okay, this step first, then this, then this, then this. A lot of the steps might still involve humans. So it doesn't mean automating processes doesn't mean it's fully automated, no human involved. It could also mean like you're basically pushing the tasks, the work to the right people at the right moment. And then you might still involve IT systems and whatever. So that's what I mean when I say process automation.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. And I can agree on what you just said. The best setups I have experienced myself were business on the one hand side, as well as IT work close together right from the beginning. So as a team and not as two separate units, where IT is developing a tool which is supporting a process on their own, and there is no real match between business and IT. And then they meet from time to time and experience, what
but
we are
I think
doing.
that's it's not a new knowledge in a way. It's something which is quite known, and all the agile developments, all the iterative developments, it's a kind of thing. Also microservices, whatever, all the trends you see normally going to like put that together, but it's still not happening in a lot of places. So
yeah, that's true. So what is the underlying philosophy of Camunda?
So a couple of things. So if you look at the vision now, is what we promise that with Camunda, if you use Camunda, you can orchestrate your processes based on a BPM and process model. So we're using BPMN, which is an ISO standard for that. You can orchestrate any endpoint. That's what we're saying. And what we're meaning is like different systems, so IT systems, people like humans. We always say devices as well, because like marketing-wise, you need three things. Two doesn't work. So it's people, systems, and devices. In a way, a device is a system. I mean, it has an API. So, but it sounds slick. So any endpoint, people, systems, and devices along that BPMN model, because that brings together business IT, what we just discussed. So it's a graphical model, also like business people can understand, but the computer can execute it. And reliably at scale. That's probably also something which is very specific for us, at least, because we're in the market for quite a while now. We're relatively big, at least from my perspective, and we're working with a lot of like also big organizations on very, very crucial use cases. So one example could be really payments. So we started with a lot of banks with example for opening bank accounts, like this typical customer onboarding process, which in a way every customer has. For a bank, it very often means opening a bank account, and then you have a couple of steps, like whatever, scoring the customer, doing some kind of address checks, probably now sanction checks, know your customer, all these kind of steps. And then you might have an approval, automatic or manual. That really depends. You might even wait for some authentication, like in Germany, it's called Postident very often, but some kind of like, we really prove that this person is this person. And then you can like enter or open the bank account in the core banking system. And some banks already assign a account number in the beginning, or you get it there and you might send out letters and whatever. That's kind of the bank open bank account process, which we did for a lot of banks. It's relatively frequent if you see big global players. So it's not we do that two times a day. That's what I thought in the beginning of bank account opening. How boring can that be? I mean, looking at the local bank here, they might do that, I don't know, once a week. But if you go to the global banks, they do that on I think a couple of thousand per day. So it's not that boring anymore, but it's still not that much. But then what I found fascinating is that if you're in that organization and they see the benefits of doing some kind of approach, so they're automating things, they're having the visual process model, they have the operations on the visual process model. If something is stuck, they're seeing exactly where it's stuck, where it came from, what is blocked by that. They're getting a lot of audit data from the run. So what's the typical path most of the applications go, or under which situations end they up in that weird, not approved state or whatever. So they can understand a lot of things about their process, which they couldn't before. And that's normally fascinating for them. And that leads to that show and tell approach. So they basically walk around the company internally and advertise that, say, okay, this is what we did, this is what we gained, and this is super great and whatever. And that happens, for example, at Goldman Sachs. I remember that. No, it was not Goldman Sachs. It was another bank also in the US. So they did that, and they approached us with, okay, this is a great approach. We want to definitely do that. We see the advantage. We want to do that for payments because we have this problem here we want to solve. It's for payments. And I was like, okay, how much payments do you do a day? And it was a big number. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then you ask a couple of other questions, like how reliable does that have to be? How much time do you have to have? Like, in what time do you need to process it? And so on and so forth. And that was quite a while back already. And then we basically said, probably not yet. So, we saw the opportunity, but we said the technology is not yet there. But that was a couple of years back. So now the technology is there, and we can run that for payments or for trading or for even like for every phone call in a telco scenario. So that's probably the third part we're also looking into, really scalability and for a lot of these core business processes of our customers. Sorry, long answer again.
Yeah, but nice. Is there another practical example? Because this is for me super interesting to see these use cases. So
yeah,
are there other typical use cases in addition to what you just explained?
I mean, it's always hard to say what's the typical use case, but the customer onboarding is a classic because that's what every industry is doing. It might be bank account opening, it might be credit card application, it might be I want a new app, your insurance claim, whatever. So that I want to have a new mobile contract. So that's basically for every industry you have that, and it's always the same thing. You do a couple of checks, you might do approval, and then you do provisioning into certain systems because it has to be entered there, and then you inform the customer and he's happy. So that's what we do a lot. But it's also for order fulfillment is also a typical example. So the typical Zalando, for example, in Germany or in Europe is a customer. So if you order some whatever pairs of shoes there, the whole thing of payment, getting stuff from stock, putting in parcel, get the shipment label, and all these kind of things that need to happen, that you get your parcel. That's the process we do. We're involved with Decathlon, for example, the retailer for the sports stuff, based in France but active in Europe, where we do kind of the same thing. Or what else? Claim settlement is pretty typical, also easy to understand. So I have a car accident, and I want to claim that. And there, for example, also processes are changing, are getting more digitized. You might use your mobile phone to make pictures. You might even use an app or something to upload them and to communicate with the insurance company. But in the end, you want to basically have some money paid out, and might even be a longer process one there. So that's a typical thing. My favorite, it's not the typical process we automate, but it's my favorite. It's the NASA, so the Jet Propulsion Lab, that Mars robot that went to space last year. Was it last year? I think it was last year, or the year before already. Time is flying anyhow, but that Mars robot, it sends down a lot of data to Earth. So we are not on Mars, unfortunately. We are on Earth. But whenever the Mars robot sends down data to Earth, then a lot of processing steps have to happen in certain orders with certain dependencies on each other. A lot of them in parallel, because if you, for example, calculate a 3D model of what you just scanned, that takes a while, and you want to do all of that in parallel, but you have to look at the dependencies. So it's a process in multi-steps. And at the very end, you know what kind of commands you send back up to space for the Mars robot to move or whatever it does. So yeah, lots of those examples.
Yeah, that's cool, and it's super interesting for me because I'm coming from this human-centric world there, and in the end, automating processes, that's one of the highest maturity levels you can achieve. But the work I'm doing right now is mostly doing the basics, bringing process orientation into the organizations, and then in the next step you can talk about automation. So. From your perspective, what are your top recommendations to rethink processes to get to a more human-centric BPM approach?
So basically, to refer to what you said before, you're in much more doing basis work to get organizations to a process orientation and being very human-centric. And from my perspective, that's one of the key things to think about. So I start the other way around. So if I look at orchestration, that's what I do all day long.
Mm-hmm.
So if I look at orchestration, the human plays a part of that orchestration. It's a piece of the puzzle. So we might end up with processes where we only have humans involved, but what does the orchestration does? Okay, it takes care the ball is not dropped, that we don't forget about anything. We might even see a status. So there might already be value in automating that process, even if it just ping-pongs tasks to certain people. So I might reduce sending emails or slacking around or whatever. It makes sense if it's kind of standardized or repetitive at least. So if it's super creative, that doesn't make much sense. But if it's repetitive, it does. And what I see is that if you have that basis, it's a great basis to probably move beyond that and saying, okay, now we understand what we're doing here. We're having kind of a structure, and now we can replace certain really tedious or annoying tasks or time-consuming tasks, which are not really good for the human, so not creative at all. It's just like, I have to type that, I have to do that. Oh shit, I have to have to do that approvals or whatever. So we all know these kind of tasks, and you can basically automate those first. And you might even have a database where you can look at audit-wise, how often does that happen? How often does that happen? How important is that? And where should I focus probably an automation effort? And then I always try to avoid that phrase, but then it can replace the human with an API call. But very often it's really, it's not a bad thing. And in most cases, it's not that people are sad not to copy data from A to B, which is an annoying task to do anyway. And I think that's how I think about that human-centric thing. So it's very often a starting point. I would try to automate, let's say, as much as possible from that process over time. And I think especially time will change things anyway, because we're moving so fast in IT, and AI, new buzzword out there, hype everywhere. So I expect that we have a lot of applications of AI, for example, in approval steps or something like where you say nowadays, like, we need a human to look at that, to understand it. And I would expect that this, for example, a machine can do much, much better, probably even with less bias. And there are a lot of reasons why. It's very often simply a legal aspect who's responsible for that decision. And I'm pretty sure if enough money is at stake, that will be solvable. But what I'm trying to say is I'm pretty sure we will have innovation here and there, which leads to a lot of things that can be easier automated. And if I have that, let's say, skeleton of the process, I understand it. And even if it's completely human-driven, I might better understand where I can pick these new technologies to deliver value in my process, and then also adjust the process. It, again, with the important, with the important requirement that it's really a repetitive process. So there are processes which I never would put into that skeleton, which are very often creative things. And, if I do that, whatever, one conference a year, it's not a very repetitive process, right? So I wouldn't apply there. And I think but that's not my term, so I can't really talk about that much. But there I would expect other technologies to be involved, because we see chatbots, for example, pretty top of mind. They're getting more powerful. So if I'm in that really ad hoc, more or less creative way, I think there are different ways how we automate certain things than in the repetitive, okay, this is my probably business process I want to run multiple times per day, typically at least, or sometimes also per week if it's a complicated process. So that might already be worth it. So it really depends a little bit on what process you have there.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's super helpful, I would say, especially for the listeners who are already on a higher maturity level, who are in an organization which thinks in processes, where they have a common understanding of what they're talking about. And now they think about, how can we continue? And that's definitely one of the next steps.
Yeah,
that's very helpful.
It's actually interesting, because from the people I talk to most, it's very often the other way around.
Yeah, I can imagine.
See, they're on the automation. They're so much in automation. We need to automate everything. Sometimes you have to stop them in a way, saying these typical 80-20 rules, saying like, okay, this exception, no.
Yeah.
Wait for it to bubble up in operations and then somebody takes care. No worries. Don't automate like every tiny, very strange exception. Doesn't make sense either.
I think we should join forces there to bring both worlds closer together, because you are working with the IT guys on the one hand side. I'm very close with all the process guys, and I know that there is often a conflict, and at the end, I guess the targets are nearly the same, but not aligned. And, so that's super interesting.
True. I mean, the other thing, and that's probably also kind of a proxy for that, but what I see happening in the market at the moment is that the separation is not that clear anymore. Very often. So on the one hand, at least the bigger organizations, they're lacking IT. Oh, okay. Everybody's lacking IT people. So that's probably throughout all organizations. But in the bigger organization, that typically leads to, no, that's probably also true for the smaller. So we will have bigger organizations. So for organization, they lack IT people basically. So even if they want to do good solutions for certain things, they don't have the people. So what happens is they are doing these more low coders things where they can do things themselves. And I mean, you're kind of a business owner now as well. So you have kind of weird responsibility around putting that invoice to that tax or whatever. So these small things, these small annoyances you want to automate because you know it's kind of possible. And then you build like small local solutions, and that's happening everywhere. And I think I forgot the exact number, but Gartner had a number which was really around, I think 40% of solutions are really driven from the business now. That's now for bigger organizations. But that's what we see happening on the one side. At the same time, I also see from our perspective, we're at the other end where we're in the IT, a lot of software development is happening. We're looking into the software development process. Pretty neat, but it means you need developers like Java people to do stuff. And we're seeing that some of the solutions now don't need that anymore because the whole world is raising abstractions with the SaaS offerings we have. We have good APIs nowadays for most of the tools. We have stuff like Open API, it's called. It's very easy to describe your API and to use it on a technical level. So there are enough standards to make it easier. So, for example, what we also do is to make it easier to leverage those technologies for non-developers. So we're not getting a low-code tool, but we're having what we call it accelerators. We have certain connectors where it can easier connect to systems if they have a proper, for example, an Open API thing. Then it can. I'm not saying drag and drop because I think that's simply not true, but it can do it on a modeling level. But what I'm trying to say is that kind of these low-code tools are coming from the one end, sometimes adding scripting and whatever, and we're coming from the software development side, adding more low-code capabilities. And the whole market is moving in a way more together, and kind of the middle is very blurry. And that's where I think a lot of things will happen over the next years, because you can build IT solutions much easier than ever. And processes are an important part of that. I definitely believe that. But what I'm trying to say is the access to it gets easier also for more and more people. Also, like if you have new people, they have more IT skills nowadays and so on and so forth. So, what I'm simply trying to, will get interesting over the next year. Sorry.
Yeah, let's have a closer look
Thinking
into
out
that
loud.
in a few seconds. Before, is there anything else you would like to share with the listeners with regards to rethinking processes we should know about Camunda?
No, I think the important thing is really rethinking it. You already said it in the question. So my hotel example was one thing. And I think the Telefonica CEO or CIO, once said it. If you digitize a shitty process, you have a shitty digital process. So you have to look at what you're doing, and you have to look at the possibilities you have. One other example probably, and we talk about that a lot, but I love it. It's from Deutsche Telekom, and they started to apply RPA a lot across the company. So they started with one project which was about technicians who, if they are out in the field, so if they come to your house in order to fix a whatever DSL line, and they do some wiring down there in the cellar, before they leave, they have to test the line if it's working. And back then they had to call an internal call center via their mobile phone, telling them the number, and then they did the test for the line with an internal tool they had. And that was annoying for everybody. They had to wait in line. The technician said, like, okay, I'm feeling like I can't do that myself. I have to call in, like, wow, what should the people think about me? And so on and so forth. So it was a really bad process. And what they did is they basically added a bot that can control that internal tool, which was super old. So there's no way to get an API for that. But they had a bot. And then they added a portal on top. So the technician could use a mobile app to enter the number, press a button, and he gets back the result. So that was a huge improvement, good success story internally. And then they started to apply RPA everywhere in a way. And then they started to apply, and then they ended up with what, and I love that term, what they called spaghetti bot integration. Because what they basically did is they redid how the people worked, but then automated the people with bots. But that doesn't mean the process is great. And they ended up, and they even did that in RPA tool. And that even means the technology was not meant to do that, like orchestrating overall processes. And what they did is then they added an orchestration layer, in this case, Camunda, not surprised probably if I'm telling that story, but they added an orchestration layer. And then they also embarked on the journey replacing bots with proper APIs where possible, and also optimizing the process along that path. And I think that's the thing. You should not simply automate what's there very often. And if you do, it's a starting point. You should be aware that there might be a much better digital way of doing things. And very often that's an opportunity to do. And especially if you ask, like, what's in it for me, that ROI question, if you really rethink processes, there's a huge opportunity. And I think for more companies than they might be aware today, it might even be a question of life or death in the long run.
Yeah.
The competition doesn't sleep, right? If they, especially customer experience is something I see with a big organization. So customers get used to things. They are getting used to that Amazon kind of experience, like, and Amazon is even not that good anymore. I think a lot of other, like, if I order something, I get it on the next day or on the same day if you're in the US, right? If I open a bank account, why do I have to wait a week to get a letter? That's insane. I want to have that like immediately. This bank can do that. So this is driving, I think, everybody in the industry, and there's no way to really like not do anything there unless you have a really very unique business model, which might be good. Then congrats.
Very good. So what is on the roadmap for the Camunda development?
So lots of things. So I think if I focus on the two biggest things we're doing at the moment, is the one is SaaS. So we have a SaaS offering. It's already there. It's in production. We have customers running on it, but that doesn't mean it's all finished or good. So for us, we introduced the SaaS offering, unofficially a couple of years back, like in a let's say a prototyping pilot mode for certain pilot customers, but publicly not that long ago. I always forget years. This pandemic really was weird with years. Was it last year or the year before? I should know that the year before it must have been. So 1.5 years. But anyhow, I mean, there are so many things you can do around SaaS. And I really believe that kind of moving to SaaS is what's happening everywhere. So Again, Germany is probably a little bit behind, but even here, banks, insurance, even like government entities are moving to the big hyperscalers. So I expect that to happen much more. And you see the big advantages of it. If you look at, for example, tools like us or other BPM tools, what we focus a lot on is like modeling experience. How can you automate your process easily, like model it, connect all the stuff and whatever. But running that at scale, what I talked around before, and we are having customers running like 10,000 of process instances per second. So running that scale is not super easy, and getting the technology to that state is not super easy. That means like probably you don't want to operate it yourself. And I think that's a big enabler, especially also for start small. It's not the first step. Okay, how can I install that big machine there? Who is operating that? Who's maintaining that? Do we need an own team for that or whatever? You can simply have it in SaaS. So I think that's a big enabler. And the second thing we're working on heavily is what I said earlier on, we call it accelerators. So having certain connectors out of the box, but more importantly, having a connector ecosystem. So we have partners like Infosys, for example, building a lot of connectors now to certain systems, which we are not forcing anybody to use those, but they might be a starting point to make certain things faster. And we have customers developing their own connectors to be used within that organization, because very often if you're whatever bank A, you have that banking system, whatever, built 20 years ago, or the mainframe, classic example, and you need to connect that all the time. So it might make sense to have a reusable connector to accelerate then building new processes. So in a way, that's the two main themes we're doing at the moment.
Okay.
Of course, we are doing tons of things here and there as well, and cool stuff. And to mention one thing, especially if people here are looking at processes, we have hack days where basically the engineers can do whatever they want. They look for a project and then try it out. And we always have great stuff coming out of that. There's something we call it CV Play. If you Google for that, find that. And there can, for example, directly play around with the BPMN model, but with a full-featured engine behind you, just don't see it. So you can see the token move, you can see certain things, you can hand in data. So you can explore what a process engine or a workflow engine means in the backend. I think that, for example, can be also very helpful if you just want to understand the topic.
Yeah. As far as I remember, at the first of your Camunda conferences you had in Berlin, I think in 2012, something like that, where I was participating, you did this live demonstration. And at that time, it was pretty cool where we could sit there with our mobile devices, open up a URL and enter some data, and we could see how the process flows on the big screen there. And that was amazing at that time for me. And it still is, I would say.
It still is for a lot of people. I always also sometimes forget, because that's kind of my daily business. And you have these heat maps where you see what traffic goes through, or where it does take long and so on and so forth. So we have really great stuff. It's also very visual very often. So that's an eye-opener for a lot of people. I also sometimes forget. It's kind of, that's normal, but no, that's super exciting. And I agree. That's why I also, coming back to the beginning, very often motivate, let's sit together, probably with the business, with the IT, the right people in a room. And if you talk about a process, like in a day, you can at least get to a clickable prototype. It might not like integrate all the systems. Yes, fair. But it might do a little bit of that. It might show you a mock-up UI or whatever. And then you have probably even some forms you can click through. And you have what you just said. You see the token move through, you see the process flowing. And this helps so much to understand what process automation means and how you should think about that. So that's definitely worth doing it, even if you don't automate that process later on, which normally happens. But if you don't, it's even a good exercise.
Yeah, cool. And I would say another information which would be very helpful for our listeners now. What about the price? What is the pricing model? What's the cost? If I'm just a startup with a small number of employees or a bigger corporation, what's the pricing model there?
So I can talk about the pricing model. I typically don't talk about prices because I'm luckily not in sales. So no, one thing we did introduce with SaaS, it's also really a self-service model with the pricing online. So everybody can check themselves, go to camunda.com. There's a pricing page. There you can see that currently, and that's always subject to change, but currently it starts with, I think, $49 per month. And there you have, and it's basically consumption based. So it means if you run more process instances, that might increase the price, or if you have more modeling users or more human task users, that might increase the price. And we even have sliders on that homepage where you can pre-calculate what for your use case, what you could expect. And that's the kind of where it starts. So the typical, I'm not even sure if that's the typical startup situation. It's a smaller startup situation, or let's just automate one process and don't think about that much. And then it increases to some extent. And then normally the bigger scenarios we have all go enterprise, and enterprise means they have a dedicated license agreement, and that depends. I'm not even sure how that's calculated exactly. That's what sales is doing. I'm trying to get my hands out of that. But we're trying obviously not to scale that in the same amount, because that's kind of the beginning scale. And then normally you reach kind of a plateau, at least for a project. And what we're trying to get at is a fair pricing, let's say it that way. Because that's also a challenge we have sometimes, is some processes run very often, but deliver not that much value for an organization. Some processes are running super rare, but deliver a lot of value for the organization. And we're trying to get to a model, at least with the bigger organization, that's fair.
Okay. Yeah, very good. So now I'm really curious, and I'd love to learn more. Where can I go to? Can I test it somehow, or what should I do?
Two possibilities. The one and easiest is simply go to use the SaaS. There's a free version available, and there's also a 30-day trial for the parts that are probably not free. So that's easy to get started there. We have get started guides that are linked for different use cases, and that's probably the third priority we have as a company. We're currently improving them. We're working on them. So expect a lot of improvements over the course of the next year. So we're putting a lot of effort into make the get started experience smooth, because with SaaS, it's super cool actually, because you don't have to install anything. We can have the modeler in the web. You can have certain connectors already prepackaged. So I think that's the easiest to get started, especially as a non-super tech person or developer. If you like, and that's more the, hey, I'm a Java senior developer or an architect. I want to really understand what it does. You can also install it locally. So via Docker, for example, if you would like, or simply download it. It's source available, so you can even dive in the sources. So it's all on GitHub. So if you're open to that, you can also explore that path in all depth.
Yeah. Okay. But if I'm not such an IT
go to
guy,
camunda.com. There's I don't know what's on the button, and it might even change on the top. But there's a big button. You can't miss that.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. And then I get help from you. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think we already landed our aircraft, and just a quick question to look a little bit beyond the borders of what we just talked about. So from your perspective, which topic, methods, tools, experts would you recommend having a closer look to get other ideas to rethink processes?
Yeah, that's what I said. It's not super simple as if you're completely newbie to that topic, it might be overwhelming. And I was asked that a couple of times already, and still I don't have that one resource, that one place where I could send people to. It's like, this is where you learn everything about process automation. So that's probably a spot in the market somebody should take, but find allies. I think that's normally the beginning. Probably not the vendors. I mean, there are good vendors out there which are pretty honest about what they can and can't. But there are others as well, which are pretty marketing. So I would try to find allies probably in your company size, your industry, probably other companies that already did something. Talk to them. My experience was in the past that more often than not, they're pretty open to talk about that, especially if they already did something, which is good. You can also talk to vendors if they can connect you to those organizations. That what we're doing a lot, like connecting them to peers, because it's also for us, it's much more interesting and powerful if others are talking about what they are doing with Camunda, for example, that we are talking about that. So that's the thing. And then, I mean, as always, my recommendation is get started, try to do something, do proof of concept or whatever, learn along the way, be prepared to make failures there, and then also be willing to correct that. So for example, and that's what we're seeing a lot. You might try to apply the wrong tool for the job at hand, because that the wrong tool category for the problem at hand, which is understandable because it's not easy to pick. And then you might recognize it over time. I'm pretty sure a company will do. And then probably simply have to replace it. I know that's effort, but be prepared for that. And that also means don't do the big bang, do small project, get them live as soon as possible. Get your hands dirty, and the typical iterative get going thing. I know that's all pretty fuzzy, but that's...
Yeah, well, that's okay. So thank you for all these insights. So before we leave the aircraft, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners?
Not that much, probably. I think we already said a lot. So I would probably, as kind of last words, would be two things. The first is, don't worry. I mean, it's others can do that as well. It's not rocket science. And if you see other organizations from the inside, it's also, I'm not sure if you say that in English. In German, you say it's only water they use for cooking as well. So don't worry too much. That's the one side. But the other side is, it's kind of serious. What happens currently with digitalization, with what other organizations are doing. I talked about customer experience early on, automation, all these kind of things, new business models. So it's not the time to simply not do anything. So at the same time, don't worry, but do something. Don't relax and sit back.
Cool. I'm now really curious to continue to learn more about that. That's great. So thank you very much for all these insights. And before we leave the aircraft, how would you describe your flight experience with just 3 words?
I got that question in advance, and I was like, oh, that's pretty hard. I wrote down excited to be here. I know it's 4 words, but I had to get through that. No, it was a pleasure. It was really nice talking to you. I hope the people get some information from that. And I know it's a lot to distill, but it was great talking to you here today. So
yeah, thank you very much, Bernd. It was really eye-opening for me, and thank you for all the insights. And I'm looking forward for my first automation project together with you. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, Mirko.
Let's recap today's new process inspiration.
Yeah, what a comprehensive overview on the market of BPM tools. And then a very interesting deep dive into process automation. I really enjoyed listening to all the different use cases and examples Bernd gave to us. And as I already said, for me, it was really eye-opening to see the different perspectives on process automation. So Bernd's perspective from an IT side on the one hand side, as well as more or less my perspective from a process side onto the same topic. And there, I think it's best to bring both worlds together as early as possible in a life cycle. And yeah, this also leads me to my core learnings of this episode, that process automation is really something for a higher maturity level. So in my perspective, you still have to start with implementing a process-oriented thinking before even thinking about automating processes. So first, document your processes, create a common understanding, and then start to manage and improve and for sure, also on a higher maturity level, automate your processes. So that was my core learning of this interview. Thanks, Bernd. Yeah, and so Camunda is more a tool for a higher maturity level and not what I'm really looking for when talking about a human-centric BPM tool, which is used as a management system platform to document processes, to create a common picture, to use this process documentation to explain new employees how to execute processes or to train employees in case of process changes. So this is what I have in mind when I'm talking about a human-centric BPM tool. And this is what we will explore in the next episode. So next episode will be the first real tool vendor interview to find a human-centric BPM tool. And then don't worry, as I already said in the introduction of this episode, I'm going to switch between tool interviews and other interesting interviews with method experts from other areas and so on. So otherwise, there would be just tool interviews for the next half year, and this is not what I'm going to do. So don't worry, there will be an interesting mix of interviews coming up. One will be about gamification, for example. I'm really looking forward to that interview. And I'm also planning an interview with a real experienced process architect, as you requested that based on one of the earlier episodes. So thank you very much for listening to this comprehensive and extraordinary tool interview today. And looking forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye and auf Wiedersehen.
You've been listening to the New Process Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode for more tools, methods, and best practices to rethink your process and push it to the next level. Thank you for listening.
Okay, before you leave, just one question to you. So I already have a long list of very, at least as I find, exciting topics for other episodes. But if there is anything special which I should have a closer look onto, just feel free to send me an email to mirko@newprocesslab.com and tell me about it. Thanks a lot. Have a great day. Bye-bye.